The sky burned red as the massive ships descended. They came like falling stars. But there was no beauty in their arrival, only terror. The people of Earth watched in horror as the enormous vessels blocked out the sun. They hovered over every major city, silent and menacing. Then a voice echoed across the planet. It was not human. It was deep, commanding, and filled with something worse than arrogance. It was certainty. Kneel before your new gods. The message played in every language, reaching every corner of the world. It came from the ones who called themselves the Elvar, an ancient race, powerful beyond imagination. Their technology defied physics, their bodies glowed with energy, and their eyes burned with an unnatural light. They were not here to negotiate. They were here to rule. The fall of humanity. The first to resist were the soldiers. Earth's armies launched missiles, fired railguns, and sent fighter jets to attack the alien ships. The world held its breath, hoping, praying, that humanity's weapons would work. They did nothing. The missiles exploded harmlessly in the air. The railgun shells simply vanished before impact. The jets never got close. With a mere thought, the Elvar turned Earth's best weapons to dust. Then came the real horror. From their ships, the Elvar released the heralds, warriors clad in golden armor, each one strong enough to tear through tanks with their bare hands. They moved like ghosts, too fast for the human eye to follow. Cities fell in hours. Governments collapsed in days. The world belonged to the Elvar now. Those who tried to resist were crushed. Those who tried to hide were dragged into the light. And those who knelt, they were spared, but only to serve. The chains of a new age. The Elvar did not slaughter humanity. That would have been merciful. Instead, they made humans their servants. Every nation became a province of the Elvar Empire. The strongest were taken to serve as slaves in their massive floating palaces. Scientists and engineers were forced to work for them, creating weapons and machines beyond human understanding. The rest? They labored under the watchful eyes of the heralds, building monuments to their new gods. It was a fate worse than death. The Elvar ruled with no emotion, no mercy. To them, humans were nothing more than insects, useful, but insignificant. But there was one thing the Elvar did not understand, one thing they could never understand. Humanity does not break so easily. A whisper of rebellion. Deep in the ruins of what was once New York, a small group of survivors gathered. They spoke in hushed voices, hiding from the Elvar patrols. Among them was a man known only as the Architect. He had seen the fall of Earth. He had watched his people kneel. But he had never bowed. The Elvar believe they are gods, the Architect said, his voice cold and sharp. They think we are weak, that we will serve them forever. He looked at the faces around him, men and women who had lost everything, eyes filled with pain and something else, a spark. They are wrong. The group fell silent. For the first time since the invasion, hope flickered in their hearts. The Architect leaned forward. We will fight. We will rise. And we will prove one thing. His voice dropped to a whisper, but the words rang louder than any battle cry. Even gods can bleed. The Elvar believed humanity was broken. They had ruled for decades, watching humans bow before them, watching cities reshape themselves in honor of their so-called gods. They did not fear resistance. They did not believe in rebellion. They thought they had won. They were wrong. In the ruins of an old city, hidden beneath layers of destruction, a small group gathered in the darkness. They spoke in whispers, their voices barely louder than the wind. Their leader, known only as the Architect, stood before them, his face half lit by the flickering glow of a stolen Elvar device. They think we are finished, he said, his voice steady. They believe we will kneel forever. A woman stepped forward. Her name was Lion, a former soldier who had lost her family to the Elvar. Her fists were clenched. How do we fight them? Their weapons are beyond anything we've ever seen. The Architect held up a small, glowing shard of metal. It pulsed with energy, humming softly in the silent room. "This," he said, "this is Elvar technology, and we are going to learn how it works." Silence filled the room. Some looked doubtful, others intrigued. One man, an old scientist named Dr. Wren, stepped closer, eyes wide. "You stole this from them." "I took it from the wreckage of one of their patrol ships," the architect replied. "It's the first step. If we can understand their technology, we can turn it against them." Lian crossed her arms. "That's a big if." The architect met her gaze. "So was walking on the moon. So was splitting the atom. But we did those too." A heavy silence followed. Then, slowly, one by one, heads began to nod. They would try. They would fight. But the Elvar were not fools. High above Earth, aboard the grand capital ship Solvaris, Supreme Lord Salthar stood before a massive screen, watching a holographic display of the planet below. His golden eyes narrowed as he observed the latest reports. "The humans are too quiet," he murmured. A herald warrior knelt before him, his voice metallic through his armored helmet. "They are broken, my lord. They work, they serve, they obey." Zalthar turned slowly. "No," he said, "not all of them." With a flick of his wrist, the hologram changed, showing the wreckage of a patrol ship. Human footprints were scattered in the dirt around it. Something had been taken. Zalthar's eyes darkened. "There is resistance." The herald bowed lower. "Shall we burn the cities again, my lord?" The Supreme Lord was silent for a moment. Then a slow, cold smile formed on his lips. "No," he said, "let them gather. Let them struggle. Let them believe they have hope." He turned away, staring down at the blue planet beneath him. "And when they finally stand," he whispered, "we will crush them so completely that no human will ever dare rise again." Back on Earth, the architect and his people worked in secret, unaware that their enemies were already watching. The spark of rebellion had been lit, but the storm was coming. The Elvar laughed when they heard rumors of human resistance. It was impossible, they thought. The humans had no weapons, no armies, and no hope. To fight the Elvar was to fight the sun itself. But deep in the ruins, hidden beneath the shadows, the resistance was preparing. The architect stood in front of a stolen Elvar console, the strange symbols flickering across its surface. Dr. Wren worked beside him, sweat dripping from his brow as he analyzed the alien technology. Lion and a group of fighters cleaned their weapons, some human-made, others salvaged from fallen Elvar patrols. "This is it," the architect said. "The first strike." Lian leaned forward. "What's the target?" The architect tapped the console. A holographic map of the city appeared, and in the center stood a towering spire of black metal. "The core nexus. It's a power relay for their planetary defenses. Take it down, and we show them they're not untouchable." Lion smirked. "They'll know we exist." The architect's eyes burned with determination. That's the point. The plan was simple. The Elvar relied on their technology, believing it made them invincible. But that arrogance had a flaw. If the power went down, so did their shields, their weapons, their entire control over the city. Under the cover of night, the team moved. They slipped through the ruins like ghosts, avoiding patrols, watching the golden armored heralds from the shadows. The city was silent, filled only with the hum of alien machines. They reached the nexus. The towering structure pulsed with blue light, stretching into the sky like a monument to Elvar supremacy. Guarding it were two heralds, their glowing eyes scanning the darkness. Lion didn't hesitate. She raised a stolen Elvar rifle and fired. The burst of red energy slammed into the first herald's chest. The warrior staggered, shocked that something could harm him. The second herald roared, raising his weapon. But before he could react, a grenade landed at his feet. The explosion sent him crashing into the metal wall. The architect rushed forward, placing a device against the nexus. Dr. Wren worked fast, fingers flying over the controls. Come on," he muttered. Then the nexus flickered. The blue light dimmed. And in the distance, across the city, the Elvar strongholds went dark. The first strike had landed. Alarms blared across the sky. The Elvar would come. But for the first time since the invasion, they would come knowing one terrible truth. The humans had learned how to fight back. Injured, Supreme Lord Zalfar's voice was cold as he stared down at the kneeling herald before him. The warrior's golden armor was scorched, cracks running along his chest plate where human weapons had struck. It was a sight Zalfar had never expected to see. "A lucky shot, my lord," the herald said, his voice strained. "The humans used our own weapons against us." Zalfar's fingers tightened into a fist. Impossible. And yet, the evidence was undeniable. The core nexus in Sector 17 had been destroyed. For the first time since their rule began, human rebels had managed to harm the so-called gods. A ripple of something unfamiliar ran through the Supreme Lord's mind. Annoyance. No. Frustration. No. It was something the Elvar had never felt before. It was concern. On Earth, deep underground, the Resistance celebrated in hushed voices. The core nexus attack had been a success. The Elvar had felt pain. And now, humanity was no longer just prey. Lion paced, restless. "We struck first. They'll come down on us harder than ever." The architect nodded. "They will. That's why we need to strike again before they recover." Dr. Wren was staring at the captured Elvar weapon fragments, his eyes wide with discovery. "Their armor isn't as strong as they claim," he muttered. "We cracked it before. If we can adjust our weapons, we can break it." Lion smirked. "So the gods do bleed." But the celebration did not last long. Above them, the Elvar moved quickly. The Supreme Lord would not allow another embarrassment. And so, the purge began. Entire districts were burned. Cities where rebels were suspected were wiped out without warning. Drones filled the sky, scanning every human. The Elvar no longer saw Earth as a conquered world. They saw it as a threat. And threats had to be eliminated. The architect watched from the shadows as an Elvar ship hovered over a refugee camp. A herald stood at the center, his voice booming. "For every attack against us, 100 of you will die," the herald declared. And then the slaughter began. Lion clenched her fists. "We have to stop this." The architect's face was unreadable. Then he said, "We will." That night, the Resistance launched another strike, one far bolder than before. They ambushed an Elvar outpost, cutting down the unsuspecting guards. Explosions lit the sky as stolen alien weapons fired against their former masters. But this time, they didn't just destroy. They captured a herald. A living, breathing Elvar warrior, bound and wounded, now lay at their feet. For the first time, an Elvar would know fear. And for the first time, humanity had proof their so-called gods could fall. The captured herald struggled against his restraints, his glowing eyes burning with fury. His golden armor was dented, his once majestic figure now reduced to a prisoner of the very creatures he had once called insects. Lion crouched in front of him, a smirk on her face. "Not so powerful now, are you?" The herald's voice was filled with rage. "You dare to defy the Elvar? You think capturing me changes anything?" He sneered. "Your people are already dying. Your cities burn. Your so-called rebellion will end in ashes." The architect stood in the shadows, watching. He did not speak, did not move. Instead, he observed. The herald was trying to act strong, but there was something beneath his words. Doubt. This was the first time an Elvar had been captured by humans. The first time one of their gods had been brought low. Dr. Wren worked feverishly in the corner, analyzing every piece of alien technology they had scavenged. He turned to the architect, excitement in his voice. "Their armor isn't just strong, it's adaptive. It shifts to resist whatever force strikes it. But it has a flaw. If we overload its energy field, it collapses completely." The architect's eyes narrowed. Meaning? Dr. Wren grinned. Meaning we can kill them. The room fell silent. For years, the Elvar had been untouchable, invincible. But now, humanity had found their weakness. Lion tightened her grip on her rifle. Then let's stop running and start hunting. But as the resistance planned its next move, the Elvar were preparing their own. High above Earth, aboard the Solvaris, Supreme Lord Salthar listened to his advisors argue. Some called for immediate extermination of the rebels. Others demanded a more strategic approach. Zalthar silenced them with a single word. Enough. He rose from his throne, his golden cloak flowing behind him. We have allowed these creatures to believe they are more than insects. His voice was calm, but there was something cold beneath it. We will remind them what they truly are. He turned to his second-in-command. Deploy the Judgment Fleet. Burn their hiding places to the ground. Leave nothing standing. The Elvar would no longer tolerate defiance. On Earth, the Resistance received the worst possible news. A massive fleet was descending upon them. Cities, towns, forests, it didn't matter. The Elvar were coming with the full force of their empire. Lion clenched her jaw. We don't have time to prepare. We can't fight them like this. The architect remained silent for a long moment. Then he looked at the captured herald. Yes, we can. The others frowned, confused. The architect stepped forward, standing over the restrained warrior. His voice was quiet, but deadly. You're going to tell us everything. The herald's eyes widened for the first time. For the first time, a god knew what it meant to be powerless. And humanity. They were just getting started. The herald refused to speak at first. His golden eyes burned with hatred, his jaw clenched in defiance. He was an Elvar, a god among lesser beings. No human could break him. But the architect knew better. He knelt in front of the captured warrior, his voice calm, almost casual. You think silence will save you. He tilted his head. You don't understand what's happening, do you? The herald glared. You believe you have won something. My people are coming. Your kind will be erased. The architect smirked. Maybe, but not today. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. And not before we use you to tear them apart. The herald's expression flickered, just for a second. Dr. Wren worked furiously behind them, pulling data from the stolen Elvar console. We have access to their communication network, he announced. If we can send the right signal, we can manipulate their fleet movements. Lion's eyes widened. You're saying we can trick them? The architect nodded. Not just trick them. Ambush them. The Resistance had no chance in a direct battle. But deception, that was a human specialty. Using the Herald's command codes, taken from his armor, they sent a falsified distress signal. A message, seemingly from the captured Herald himself, requesting urgent reinforcements at a remote location. The Judgment Fleet took the bait. The Elvar warships moved to the false coordinates, expecting to find desperate rebels hiding in the wastelands. Instead, they found nothing. Nothing but a trap. The Resistance had rigged an entire ruined city with explosives, mines, EMP blasts, stolen Elvar tech twisted against them. The first wave of ships entered low orbit, scanning for signs of life. Then the sky exploded. Buildings collapsed, fire ripped through the air, and energy surges overloaded the Elvar ship's systems. Several vessels lost control, crashing into the ruins below. For the first time since their arrival, the Elvar fleet suffered real damage. On the Solvaris, Supreme Lord Salthar watched in stunned silence. His forces had walked into a human trap. Impossible, he whispered. The humans were not just resisting. They were winning battles. On the ground, the architect, Lian, and their fighters watched the destruction unfold from a safe distance. Smoke and fire filled the horizon, but the architect did not smile. He only watched, his mind already moving to the next step. This was just the beginning, he said. Dr. Wren adjusted his glasses, barely believing what they had pulled off. We just struck the first real blow. Lion checked her weapon, her voice filled with determination. Then let's hit them again. The herald, still bound, stared at the devastation in disbelief. The mighty Elvar, tricked by mere humans. His gods had been wounded. For the first time, he felt something no Elvar had ever known before. Fear. And for the first time, humanity had hope. But the war was far from over. Zalfar's golden eyes burned with fury as he gave the order. Prepare the annihilation protocol. The gods had been challenged. Now, they would bring down their full wrath. The sky burned. The Elvar had unleashed their final weapon, the annihilation protocol. Entire cities vanished in an instant, turned to dust by orbital bombardments. The Earth shook as energy beams carved deep scars into the planet's surface. The Elvar were done playing games. Supreme Lord Salthar stood aboard the Solvaris, watching as the Judgment Fleet reduced human strongholds to rubble. His golden eyes were cold, his expression unreadable. "This ends now," he said. But deep underground, in the last stronghold of the Resistance, the architect was not afraid. He watched the destruction on stolen Elvar monitors, his expression grim but focused. "They're scared," he said. Dr. Wren turned to him, shocked. "Scared? They're burning the planet." "Exactly," the architect replied. "If they were truly gods, they wouldn't need to destroy everything. They'd simply win. But they can't. They know we're still out there. They know they can't stop us." Lion loaded a plasma rifle. "So what's the plan?" The architect exhaled slowly. "We finish this." The Resistance had spent months learning the Elvar's technology, their weaknesses. They had taken down ships, captured a herald, and even tricked the Elvar into walking into their traps. Now, they would take the fight straight to Salthar himself. The plan was madness. Steal an Elvar warship, infiltrate the Solvaris, assassinate the Supreme Lord. The suicide mission. And yet, no one hesitated. Under the cover of darkness, the Resistance hijacked an Elvar transport vessel. Disguised as captured prisoners, they slipped past the fleet's defenses, docking with the Solvaris unnoticed. Inside the Elvar capital ship, the Resistance moved like shadows, eliminating guards with stolen plasma blades. They were faster, quieter, and more ruthless than the Elvar had ever expected humans to be. Then, they reached the throne room. Zalthar stood waiting. Golden armor gleaming, eyes filled with contempt. He did not call for his guards. He did not flee. "You believe you are warriors," he said. "You believe you are my equal." He stepped forward, his power radiating through the air. "I am Elvar. I am a god." The architect raised his weapon. "No." His voice was steady. "You're mortal." The first shot burned through the Supreme Lord's chest. A second shattered his throne. And the third sent the so-called god to his knees. For the first time, Supreme Lord Salthar bled. His golden hands clutched at his wound, his face twisted in shock. "This is not possible," he gasped. The architect stood over him, his voice cold. "It was always possible." With a final shot, the last god fell. The Solvaris shuddered. The Elvar fleet, leaderless, fell into chaos. Some ships fled, others were captured. Humanity had won. The war was over. The Elvar had called themselves gods, but humanity had proven them mortal.